Today's workshop is Unpacking Vermont's New Literacy Law, Act 139, to teach all students to read. I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Dorinne Dorfman, who has served as a teacher and principal for nearly 30 years in Vermont schools. In 2023, she traveled to Mississippi to observe structured literacy in pre-K to 5 classrooms and interview school and state leaders. Since completing an education specialist degree in reading and literacy instruction, she has taught evidence-based literacy to struggling readers at Barre Town Middle School. Joining her is Brittany Lovejoy, who is an Aughton-Gillingham literacy tutor and family advocate. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Welcome. My name is Dorinne Dorfman.
And I'm Brittany Lovejoy.
We're grateful to be presenting today about Act 139, an act relating to supporting Vermont's young readers through evidence-based literacy instruction. When this was passed by the Vermont legislature, it went into effect back in May. And of course, it was signed by the governor. And this presentation was developed by a group of Vermonters working toward every student learning to read. Oh, I just realized something. I need to stop sharing a second. Hold on a second. Just one moment, please. I have to go back. Okay, sorry about that. As I said, I'm Dorinne Dorfman.
I'm Brittany Lovejoy.
And we're ready to present.
Welcome.
Yes. So our goal today is to educate every Vermonter in the opportunities Act 139 provides that are necessary for teaching all students to read, which is the very purpose of the literacy law. Throughout this slideshow, we will be showing examples of evidence-based instruction. As Karen had said, I traveled to Mississippi last year, and so many of the photographs you will see were shots taken at schools down there. Okay, why was Act 139 passed? So Vermont parents and teachers, the legislature, and the governor recognized that not all schools provided evidence-based reading instruction. Vermont students had been declining in reading for over a decade, from among the top scoring states in the United States to the middle of the pack. And in 2022, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, that's a national assessment taken by students across the country, 66% of our fourth graders were reading below grade level. On this same test, over the last 20 years, 23% more students who are eligible for special education were reading at the lowest level, below basic level, which means they essentially can't read. And during that time, over the 20 years, the average score for students eligible for special education had declined by 27 points.
The left side chart shows the score range of fourth graders who do not receive special education. Just 41% read proficiently. The right side chart shows the score range of fourth graders who qualify for special education. Only 6% read proficiently. With advances in reading research, some districts have retrained teachers and bought new teaching and assessment materials, while others use approaches and tools disproven or even harmful to children's reading development. Not all schools may teach or assess the 5 components of reading, which are the building blocks for literacy. For over a decade, other states have shifted to evidence-based practices, some even prohibiting prohibiting unscientific approaches and programs. There are very strong laws can be found in Mississippi, whereas these photos were taken in Florida, Connecticut, and Washington, D.C. What are the 5 components of reading? One is phonemic awareness, which you identify and manipulate phonemes in spoken words.
So, Brittany, we're just going to demonstrate this for a second. Say best.
Best.
Now say best, but instead of s, say
Bent.
Great. Say bent.
Bent.
Now say bent, but don't say
Bet.
Wonderful. Say bet.
Bet.
Now say bet, but instead of say
Bat.
So that is an example of a phonemic awareness exercise.
Another component of reading is phonics, and that's understanding sound letter correspondence to decode and encode words. Decoding is when we read the words, encoding is when we spell the words. Another component is vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension.
In Act 139, it reads that explicit and systematic instruction on code-based and comprehension-based reading skills and needs-based support are the most effective literacy practices for the early grades. This statement recognizes the decades of definitive reading research from across the world. Many researchers now believe that 95% of students can learn to read well with evidence-based instruction when given in grades K through 3, which is when the brain is primed to learn oral and written language. So in this illustration on the left side, we can see how the brain naturally develops in oral language in the language centers of the brain. On the right side, it shows the rewiring of the brain that occurs that they see in fMRI machine technology of these literacy centers that combine different areas of the brain in order to work to, I don't mean to say combine, but in order to work together in which the written language is mapped. I want to unpack some of this vocabulary. So what is explicit instruction? So an explicit approach involves clearly, visibly, and directly modeling and breaking down complex concepts step by step. Students respond frequently to show their understanding, and teachers give immediate and corrective feedback. They have to make that error correction right away. Systematic. A systematic approach refers to a planned sequence of skills, progressing from the simpler to more complex and from more common to less common. The teacher fully aligns the instruction with literacy curricula as well as addresses students' reading gaps. Code-based instruction is an approach that directly teaches students in-depth knowledge of phoneme grapheme correspondences. So that refers to the sounds, this connection between sound and letter or letters, syllable patterns, morphemes, and morphemes is the meaning of the parts of words, orthographic rules, so that has to do with everything to do with the writing, so spelling, syntax, sentence structure, and word origin. So these are all the building blocks of written English. So comprehension-based reading, so this is all about reading in, methods. So a comprehension-based approach is a metacognitive approach that teaches students to envision text meaning in their mind, to annotate, so to write along their understanding while they're reading, to look up unfamiliar vocabulary words, to write summaries after they've read a paragraph or a page, to recall what they had read, to talk with others about the content, and to compare and contrast their new learning with their prior knowledge. All of this aids comprehension. Their comprehension also improves when students are explicitly taught decoding, so reading but by the code, grammar, sentence structures, syntax, which is the order of words in a sentence, and morphology, which I said was the meaning of word parts, so prefixes, suffixes, and roots.
What is evidence-based instruction in Act 139? Systematic and explicit means that reading instruction is provided daily in K through 3 classrooms, embedded across subjects, and aligned with the K-3 4 years curriculum sequence and a progression of expected skills. Best literacy instruction also embeds clearly sequenced and direct spelling and writing instruction. Now, that's not part of the law, but it is best practice to include in your classrooms.
This is an example of a recommended lesson that teaches the 5 components of reading. So I'm just going to walk you through it. It's published by the 95% group. So in the beginning of a lesson, like many lessons teachers instruct, the teacher would state the goal and purpose of the lesson. Then it begins with some phonemic awareness practice that Brittany and I demonstrated. That's one example. Then they review previous learning, then moving on to introducing the new concept. So let's say the spelling of J as in GE or DGE, and there's a spelling rule that goes along with that. And then providing guided practice. So the teacher would be leading exercises in which students would have to practice whether they use GE at the end of a syllable or DGD at the end of a syllable. So an example, like in the word beige, it has a vowel team, so it's going to end in GE, whereas in the word badge, it's going to end in DGE because it's after, in that syllable, it's after a short vowel sound. Then there's extended practice where students might be working in pairs or doing a number of activities. The teacher will also have dictation, where students will be writing for the younger students, still practicing their sounds. So if I were instructing the lesson, I would say to students, what says J? And they were to write J, G, and DGE to show their the 3 spellings of the sound J, and also spelling words and writing sentences that are dictated. Then connecting the word to meaning. So that says phonics vocabulary, constructing a multiple meaning web, locating words that have similar meanings. And so if we go back to the DGE example, I might be talking about a word like knowledge with knowledgeable or unknowledgeable or acknowledge, so that we can create a word web from that knowledge, and also pointing out the irregularity of the word know, and that the first syllable sound changes from no to na, as in knowledge. So it'd all be very explicitly taught. And then finally, the students would be reading text, a decodable text with a high proportion of words. So that might have edge and bridge and fudge and if we were to include GE, it might have urge and singe and cage as all part of that lesson. So again, this is an example of an explicit, code-based, and comprehension-based lesson that's all part of a systematic approach to literacy instruction in grades K through 3. I would like to share more about the law because it also updated previous school law. In reading instruction, so the underlying areas are the ones that is where the changes have been put in place. So a public school or approved independent school, and my understanding is that this slide deck will be emailed to everyone, and this has a link to it so you can see the list of approved independent schools in Vermont. So a public school or approved independent school that is eligible to receive public tuition that offers instruction in grades kindergarten, 1, 2, or 3. So they don't have to have all 4 grades. They have to have at least one of those grades. Shall provide systematic and explicit evidence-based reading instruction to all students. So I'm just going to reiterate, that's all students in grades K, 1, 2, and 3. So the lesson that we looked at before was an example of a systematic and explicit evidence-based reading lesson, and that this shall be done, that this is not an option, that this will happen, and that the law had come into effect last May. In addition, such schools, so in this, that's added because it's including not just public schools, but the approved independent schools. Such schools shall provide supplemental reading instruction to any enrolled student whose reading proficiency falls below proficiency standards for the student's grade level, or whose reading proficiency prevents progress in school. So most of this second section here was on the books before. The added part is about below proficiency standards. So that's very helpful because proficiency standards need to be measured, and that's where assessment comes in. Okay. Schools shall provide support and information to the parents and legal guardians of such students regarding the student's current level of reading proficiency, which shall be based on valid and reliable assessments. So when it refers to such students, it's referring to students whose reading proficiency falls below proficiency standards, or whose reading proficiency prevents progress in school. So that's when it's talking about those such students. But this is brand new, based on valid and reliable assessments. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Students who require supplemental instruction tailored to the unique difficulties encountered, here is the new part, shall, so must, be provided by those additional supports by an appropriately trained education professional.
Who is affected by Act 139? K-3 students. They're going to be receiving evidence-based classroom instruction and assessment, and if needed, supplemental instruction in all grades. Schools, public and approved independent schools with students in K through third, teachers and principals are going to receive training in evidence-based instruction and assessment, and parents and guardians receive notification if their child is significantly below in reading in the school response within 30 calendar days of testing. The Vermont Agency of Education, the AOE, and other state agencies will be collecting literacy data of each school with students in grades K through 3, reviewing assessments for reading screening, and reporting student reading progress to the Vermont legislature. And the Literacy Council, representing professional education organizations, including the Vermont State University and UVM. 3 teachers are on the council, 2 community members, 1 student, and an AOE staff member with dyslexia expertise to advise the AOE on improving literacy instruction and assessment. Okay, what are the new requirements for approved independent schools? This is important for advocates, which is maybe a little different as well, and parents, of course, and of course, approved independent schools. They need to develop a grade level appropriate school literacy plan informed by student needs and assessment data. The plan may include identification of a literacy vision, goals, and priorities. The plan shall, which means it must address the following topics: assessment measures and indicators, screening assessment, instruction, intervention, and progress monitoring, professional learning activities for K through 3 teachers and administrators, on systematic and explicit evidence-based reading instruction to all students, conducting and analyzing assessments to inform instruction and intervention, communicating with families regarding screening results in a supportive way.
So we're going to return to evidence-based screeners. So this part of the presentation is not in the law. This is our recommendation for what is meant by evidence-based screeners. In Act 139, there is not a definition of evidence-based or systematic or code-based or explicit. So that's part of why we've been sharing these definitions with you. So in our professional opinion, effective screening of elementary skills based on grade level predictive measures would include, and I just want to talk about these predictive measures because some of these measures or assessments can predict the likelihood of how successful a student will be in reading if they don't have explicit instruction. So when we find those early gaps, like in letter sound and naming fluency in kindergarten, that if students are struggling in this area, they're very likely going to struggle when it comes to blending the sounds together and reading the words and sentences. So that's why it's often called a predictive measure. Not all of them are predictive measures. Many of them are simply the skill the student has currently, which then can inform instruction. So as I said, letter sound and naming fluency, phonemic awareness, decoding accuracy, so reading accuracy of real words and of non-words. So non-words would be for common spelling patterns, like that DGE I mentioned before. So if we have a nonsense word like lidge, L-I-D-G-E, a student would know that that said lidge and not lige and not liege. So then decoding fluency of real words and non-words. So the fluency has to do with how rapidly that they're reading. Do they read hesitantly? Do they read quickly? Also oral reading fluency. So that's passage reading. So that would be after kindergarten. So that has to do with the reading rate, number of words per minute, and accuracy. So it's a percentage. Reading comprehension. So they read a passage and explain what they read. Or there are other assessments where they answer questions, handwriting, and then spelling, regularly spelled words and irregularly spelled words. So here on the bottom is copied from the National Council on Teacher Quality, because they publish a report called The 4 Pillars to Reading Success, and that's linked here also. And they list many assessment tools that are recommended for use and the different areas of literacy that are assessed. But they also gave this area of not recommended with the X there. So I'll read this to you. They say, there are a number of tools which do not align with the principles of the science of reading, otherwise known as evidence-based reading. The tools in this list, while popular in many schools, rely on the 3 cueing system of reading words, a method that is not supported by consensus research. Most notable of these are running records, Fontes and Pinnell, also known as F&P, the Benchmark Assessment System, BAS, and the Developmental Reading Assessment, the DRA. Some more about evidence-based screeners. So evidence-based reading instruction and ongoing monitoring of student progress refers to using classroom practices based on clear and convincing proof from well-designed research and data analysis, otherwise known as objective. So question, is the evidence objective? So anyone who was looking at the same findings would interpret it in a similar way. Is the evidence reliable? We would say the same results with different students, that is, if they performed at the same level, no matter if their location or the time of day. That they are valid, that the data truthfully represents the tasks needed to show success. So this is a task in phonemic awareness. It is a valid assessment for phonemic awareness. It's systematic. The results followed a rigorous and organized plan or set of procedures. So when I am training to administer a new assessment, I really have to follow those procedures to a T in order to administer the assessment with fidelity so that my results will be objective, reliable, all of those things, because the actual administration of the assessment is extremely important. And finally, is it refereed, which means that content experts checked and approved the results. And those content experts are the developers of those literacy assessments, not lay people. I mean, we're not really lay people, but I'm a school teacher. You're a literacy tutor. So we're not the ones who are the content experts. It would be the people who are actually designing these tests. This is an example of a valid, reliable assessment with clear performance benchmarks, and it's published by Acadience Reading. And if you just bear with me, I'm going to walk you through this. So this is a measure for reading fluency that includes words correct per minute, accuracy, and comprehension, so retelling. And the scores include above benchmark, and cutoff point for risk. So I'm going to explain this right here. So let's say we're at the end of second grade. Here we are at the end. On benchmark, a student at the end of second grade, on benchmark, reading on grade level, is reading 87 words per minute. That's here in the thick black here. I'm hoping you can see my arrow here. Above it, you can see if a student is reading at 104 words per minute, then they are above benchmark. And if they're reading only 65 words per minute, that's the cutoff point for risk. And when a student is at the cutoff point of risk, they need immediate intervention, that they are not likely to grow unless they have intensive instruction to address this. So that has to do with words correct per minute. Now let's look at accuracy. So at the end of second grade, a student should be reading this passage, and in this assessment program, they provide the passages for students to read. They're all grade level normed. It would not be a passage from a book, say, that I have on a shelf in my classroom, or from a different program. This is all aligned with its program, but it's been externally validated by other assessment programs, and that's how we know that this is a valid measure. So going back to accuracy, at the end of second grade, a student should be reading with 97% accuracy on those passages. If the student is reading at 99% accuracy, then they're above benchmark. Fabulous. If the student is reading at 93% accuracy, then that's the cutoff point for risk and needs intervention or more classroom instruction to improve accuracy. Then here's the retell section. So retell refers to comprehension. Imagine the student has read the passage to you in the 1 minute of reading, and then they tell you what the story is about. So 27 refers to the number of words the student says, that is, accurately says. So if a student starts telling you things that didn't actually happen in the passage they read, those you don't say that you don't count those words. So that's benchmark, that they said 27 accurate words. If the student said 39, then they're above benchmark, great. But if they only said 18, that's a cutoff point for risk. Then there's the quality of the retell. So benchmark is a 2, and a 1, which is the lowest score, would be the cutoff point for risk. I know that was a lot of information, but assessment is a professional business. So something else that I wanted to be sure to mention is that Act 139 talks about dyslexia. And until now, Vermont was only one of 3 states that did not have a dyslexia screening law. But it is important for us to see what the law actually states for us. So in 139, it says, additional diagnostic assessment and evidence-based curriculum and instruction for students demonstrating a substantial deficit in reading or dyslexia characteristics shall be determined by data-informed decision-making within existing processes in accordance with required federal and state law. So in order for a student to be considered dyslexic, they would need to have a much further evaluation than what reading screeners would show. So that's why it's clear about dyslexia characteristics, which is language I very much appreciate. But to determine if a student actually has specific reading disability, otherwise known as dyslexia, that would not come from these screeners. But if a parent or guardian is informed that their child is significantly below proficient, as the law says is required for K-3 in reading, or shows dyslexia characteristics, or if the parents themselves suspect that their child has dyslexia, they can contact the school for additional testing.
It's true. And you could ask for a comprehensive educational evaluation, and the Vermont Family Network can help you with that as well, with the words to use and who to send it to. You could even ask your school for some support in that. It does need to be requested in writing if you want to have official deep testing done.
Great, thank you.
How do schools show completion of teacher training? This is important, I think, for advocates and parents, and of course, teachers and administrators. Act 139 requires schools to document the participation of teachers and principals who train in teaching and assessment using evidence-based literacy methods. Parents and guardians can ask what the school plans to do or has completed for this required training. Parents and guardians can ask for the names of the literacy training programs completed by teachers working with their children.
Before we move on, we need to say there's no quotation marks here. This is not what the law says. This is what we're recommending, that there are requirements that schools need to fulfill to submit to the Agency of Education. This is our recommendation for how schools can show this to parents, because you're probably very curious about the assessments going to be used or have been used in your district.
What else can parents and guardians and advocates request to support their child's reading? Schools need to show evidence that a student is improving at a rate in which they will catch up to their peers and perform on grade level within a reasonable length of time. Act 139 requires schools to train teachers and principals to conduct valid, reliable screeners and other assessments, including for dyslexia characteristics, according to the specifications of the assessment. These must test the 5 components of reading. Many include benchmark assessments 3 times a year, fall, winter, and spring, and others have curriculum-based measures conducted 2 to 4 times a month. Parents and guardians can request information on their school's assessment, and I think that's just such an important sentence. And you can ask also that the schools help teach you what these mean, because there's a lot of words in there that are so new and hard to understand, and it's taken us years to really get into the depth of this. And so as a parent myself, there's a lot of new vocabulary that we learn when we're learning about our students' learning and teaching and their needs. Go ahead. Okay, what is recommended for schools to share with parents and guardians? So the name of screeners and other assessments used to measure each of the 5 components of reading, the student's score on each assessment and measure of the student's proficiency level, and grade level benchmark on each assessment, which is based on national norms.
So this is a recommendation, and here on the right is a nonsense word fluency assessment. So an example of what I was explaining to you before, and it actually happens to be scored. When this is conducted, it becomes a part of the child's record. So this is something that a parent can ask to see.
Okay, they are also recommended for schools to share with the parents and guardians notification of whether or not the student has dyslexia characteristics, the school's response to address the student's reading gaps, process for tracking student growth, future communication with parents and guardians to report students' reading progress, and suggestions for home support of literacy, such as taking turns reading aloud, or how to immediately provide corrective feedback. And you can possibly, like, if you know that your child is a struggling reader, because you will know as a parent, you can ask for decodable text at that level, because if schools are teaching evidence-based instruction, they'll be following a sequential manner. And so, especially in kindergarten and 1st grade and 2nd grade, the school should be able to provide you with some type of decodable text. And not all students will need that at the early age. I do want to say that.
Okay, and I do want to mention that the challenge with decodable text is it needs to align with what is being taught in class. So if a decodable text is with DGE, with words like badge and fudge and hint and ledge, but that's what they're doing like a few months from now, and the student hasn't learned the concept yet, that's not a good match to do at home. They should be practicing the skills that are being taught, in real time.
That's right.
And so if they're still working on short and long vowel short and long vowel sounds, then that'd be a great decodable text to have at home.
That's right.
Okay. All right. So we're coming toward the bend of this presentation, and soon we'll be able to open up for questions. And we did get some questions in advance that we can address right away. But I want to share, so what can a school do or a parent request if their student is not improving in reading? So after months of classroom instruction, literacy intervention, and/or special education services, if a student still makes little or no growth or even regresses on assessments, then the school literacy team needs to consider its scientifically based reading system for effectual decision-making. And you can see that this is linked as well, the scientifically based reading system. That is another way of referring to the MTSS, the multiple tiered system of supports, but this is specifically just about literacy. So what the school literacy team can consider is reviewing the instruction that's been given and determining how these target the students' literacy gaps, and if needed, identifying other barriers. And so I added absenteeism there because if a student is not in school to receive the instruction, then that's going to be a barrier. And there may be other barriers, but we're generally looking at the delivery of instruction. Then aligning instruction to address specific gaps, modifying the group size, usually considering whether it needs to be smaller or maybe even a student needs one-on-one instruction, which is not common. And I'm not recommending it. I'm just putting it out there as one of the things that are considered. Increasing the frequency and/or duration of targeted instruction. So how many days a week and how long that instruction lasts when they receive it. Collaborating to reinforce targeted instruction throughout the school day. So it might be being taught in class, might be taught during intervention, it might be repeated in another content area, so the student really masters those skills. And informing and involving parents and guardians on the student's progress and involving them in the next steps to improve the child's reading performance. So what else can parents and guardians do if their child's not receiving evidence-based instruction or remediation, or is not making reasonable progress? So if you find that your student in K through 3 is not receiving evidence-based reading assessments, classroom instruction, and if needed, intervention, then Act 139 has not been fully implemented at your school. Governor Scott and the state legislature believe that Act 139 will lead to big reading improvements in public and approved independent schools with K-3 students. And we hope so too. Mm-hmm. But our officials will need to hear from us if the law does not do this. And in addition, parents can inform, especially in writing, your local school board and Vermont educational organizations. So there's the Vermont National Education Association, the Superintendent's Association, the Principals Association, the Agency of Education. You can reach out directly to our Interim Secretary of Education, Saunders. The co-sponsors of Act 139 are representatives and senators who advance the legislation. The Vermont Council on Literacy, which is talked about in depth in Act 139, though we did not go into that here, that's part of the law. Also, here we are with the Vermont Family Network, if it's appropriate, to the Disability Law Project of Legal Aid, or even the American Civil Liberties Union, because this is really on the books in a big way. It's a very fast implementation time, so we may need to show some patience, but this is the direction that we are expecting to see right now. So thank you so much. We again had received some questions in advance, but I just didn't know if you wanted any last comment at this point.
Thanks for joining us. I saw a few teachers who may be on their in service right now, so thank you for joining us as well, and parents and guardians and administrators. So this is important, really important for our students, our children, the future of Vermont.
Okay, so thank you, Doreen. I guess we'll move on to that next piece. But before we get to the questions, we would like to take a short pause, just 1 minute, to ask those of you who are on to complete the evaluation for the workshop so that we can make improvements and fulfill our grant requirements. Please see the link in the chat and take a minute now to complete that. Okay, Doreen and Brittany, I will go ahead and read the questions. As you said, we have received a few before the presentation, and there are a number that have shown up during the presentation, and I'll go ahead and read them. So the first question is, what is the affordability of tutors when extra help is needed?
Yes, so generally private tutors are very expensive because, you know, and anywhere upwards from $50 to $100 an hour. And it's especially expensive because students need to have at least 2 or 3 1-hour sessions a week in order to make progress in reading. And it is so expensive because it takes years of professional training to learn how to teach evidence-based reading. But Act 139 makes it clear that reading instruction is supposed to take place at school. I mean, it talks about supplemental services. It talks about, I don't want to say services, supplemental instruction. That's how it calls it. So there really should not be a need for parents to hire a tutor outside of school. According to the law, that when gaps are determined, the students are going to get the evidence-based instruction that they need. I gave the example earlier of in systematic instruction, the teacher is following a curriculum, but the teacher is also filling literacy gaps among the students.
Okay, a parent asked a question about how are schools going to be held accountable for following this new law?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen again. I will do the best I can to make that happen. Just bear with me. Okay, so we have a couple of more slides here that talks about the accountability. So each supervisory union and approved independent school, so here I'm reading on the left, shall, so must, annually report to the agency. And so they're going to report the number and percentage of students in grades K through 3, how the number percentage of students who are performing below proficiency on their local assessments and on their state assessments. Now, the Agency of Education already has the state reading assessment results because they're the ones who provide the results to the schools. But that is the accountability piece, plus schools need to submit the names of the universal reading screeners that they're utilizing. And so those screeners are supposed to be assessing the 5 components of reading. Now, just some note about this slide is that on the left side, that's in green, that is verbatim the law, and it shows the page number and the section of the law where you can find it. And then on the right side, we have some commentary of what would be best practice, though it's not in the law. The other thing I want to add is that the Agency of Education might be asking for subgroup information. So typically subgroup information on, that is the number and percentage of students who were not proficient on the assessments. And those groups are often whether the students are divided between students eligible for special education versus not eligible for special education, whether their income based on whether they're eligible for free or reduced meals, or they're not eligible for that, or by race, ethnicity, and that's divided by different ethnic groups. And on this slide here, I have the results from the most recent testing available. So this was in 2023. So if I just take a second, that students who were low income, that is, they were eligible for free reduced meals in grade 3, only 29% of the students were proficient on the state assessment. And then among the 9th graders, 25% were proficient on the state test. So they would need to be, so the school would, if this was a specific school, these are state results. In a specific school, they would be saying, okay, 75% of our 9th graders are who are eligible for free or reduced price meals are not passing the state assessment. So similarly, in special education, in grade 3, only 14% passed the assessment. And then among those, the 9th graders, and these are 2 different groups of students because this is from last year. So last year testing the 3rd graders' performance and the 9th graders' performance. So in 9th grade, you can see that that group had an even lower percentage of students passing the test. And then we have by the ethnic group of African American, so that a third had passed the assessment in 3rd grade, and then in 9th grade, 29% passed. And I'm just going to show you quickly one more slide, which is a comparison between students by those subgroups. And again, it's optional whether this is going to be required for schools. I shouldn't say it's optional. I'm not going to say, I misspoke. It is still to be determined by the Agency of Education whether or not schools need to report subgroup data. But they already have subgroup data on the state assessment. So if I start down here at the bottom, so 4th graders who were eligible for free meals, only 38% passed the state assessment in 2023, compared to 67% of the students who passed who were not eligible for free meals. So they were not from a low-income background. And then for students with disabilities, 17% of 4th graders passed the assessment, and the students who were not diagnosed with a disability, 66% passed. So you can see that we have a big achievement gap. But I'm going to stop sharing at this point and go on to the next question.
Okay, those were certainly interesting numbers. So there are quite a few questions, so I'll move on. So how best to get a school to help a student catch up in reading with age peers when he might have started school a year late?
Okay, so if this parent goes back to slides 11 and 12, they will see that students who require supplemental instruction tailored to their unique difficulties shall be provided those additional supports by an appropriately trained educational professional. So let's hope that the school has someone trained to help catch that student up. And the focus of Act 139 is on grade level and not age. So.
Okay, I see Ali has the hand up.
So thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you, Karen, for bringing us together here today. And again, I mean, I believe that we need to say a special thank you to all the teachers for the work that they do. We don't realize all of these challenges sometimes, and I'm glad that this law is in. So before I ask my question, someone is asking whether or not we can have the link to the most recent version of the law. I think via email, it will be good. Now, my question is specific to the role of early childhood educators, that are in charge of supporting the kids before kindergarten, and also families. Does this law has any language that will equip the parents and early childhood providers about knowledge and expertise in order to support kids to be ready for kindergarten? And was just wondering if there is any of that. Thank you. Thank you so much again for bringing us here.
That's a great question. Brittany and I were strong supporters of the development of this bill, and it started with pre-K. So we were actually asking for pre-K through 5 legislation, and for reasons that are I couldn't go into depth about, just because of my lack of knowledge. The law is K-3, so it does not apply to pre-K. We know full well how important the pre-K development is in phonemic awareness and letter sound correspondence and other early literacy skills. All of the phonological awareness activities like rhyming and alliteration are that I had seen when I was in Mississippi, which many of these photos depicted. I hope we get there, but it is not in legislation now, this legislation.
So actually, a question here, which actually kind of is a natural follow-up. What can parents do to support their kids and the schools? How will schools avoid stigmatizing kids to their peers?
So those are two broad questions. And in terms of parents to support their kids in their schools, I think to learn as much as they can about evidence-based literacy instruction, both for reading and writing, and learning methods for phonemic awareness. There's a lot that can be practiced at home, but once again, I'll just reiterate, it's the responsibility of the school to provide evidence-based instruction. I will not be the first person to say, read to your kids all the time. And so that's always recommended. Think aloud, oral language skill development. Those are all very important to do and well documented elsewhere. And the schools themselves to find out as much as you can and ask good questions from teachers, from administrators about what assessments that they use to measure the 5 components of reading. And so how will the stigmatization question, I shut off my phone.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
Okay, so I'll go on.
avoid stigma.
Yeah, sorry about that distracting noise. I thought I'd shut off my phone. How will schools avoid can't say it right now, kids to peers? So when we look at the percentage of students who are not proficient in reading, we're really talking about a lot of students who need additional targeted instruction, supplemental instruction, and that can become receiving that kind of instruction can be normalized in a school because lots of students have lots of different needs, and receiving tailored instruction based on filling those gaps is really very commonplace.
Okay, it's about 5 to 4, and our presenters have agreed to stay for a few more minutes later, though no more than probably 10 minutes after the hour. So I'll go ahead and go through the rest of the questions and see how much we can get covered. So a question here is about, someone is asking about the strengths and weaknesses approach to qualifying for special education.
Okay, well, this is not mentioned in Act 139, so we would recommend that you contact the Vermont Family Network again for more information on this topic, or you can find information at your student's school or the Agency of Education. There is an AOE definition. However, when I printed this off, it must have been in color. So if you Google the AOE and look up their definition, you can learn more about that. You also, I found if you send messages to the Agency of Education, they're very good at, they formerly were very good at responding. So when my children were in this position of me asking questions and advocating for them and seeking information, they were good at answering questions. And of course, we know the Vermont Family Network. Thank you, Karen.
Okay, that's a question from a professional. Templates would be awesome, particularly for the parent letter.
Yes, I was thinking of that. I believe this lines up a little bit with slide 19 with an evidence-based screener. So I recently worked with a family from New York, and they sent me, the student was flagged for dyslexia, and they sent me the information, and it actually was part of the screener. The template was part of the screener. So the agency doesn't have a list of screeners yet available, but just hopefully teachers, I understand this, like it could be a little bit of work to create these templates. So if there's a screener out there with a template, that would be helpful. And I found it to be very comprehensive, and it was quite good what I had looked at.
In
recently.
Act 139, it says that the Agency of Education will provide guidance on the form and content of the parent notification letter, and they're expected to have that in November.
Excellent.
It would be great for schools to have that earlier to be able to meet the deadline because most screeners are administered by the middle of October, usually some early September, and then to meet that within 30-day deadline to have that notification letter in advance. And the Agency of Education does have a list of reviewed screeners. It's not a vetted approval process. It's just a list of screeners and some commentary about each of the screeners. So that is feedback that has been given to the AOE to only list valid, reliable screeners and not a much longer list that might lead to confusion of what to use.
It's great.
Okay, there's a question about children who are in grade 4 and up, who did not have access to such a comprehensive evidence plan, and as a result are reading below grade level and have continued reading challenges. So what support would be available for older kids?
Well, it does say clearly in the law that any student who is below proficient in any grade, so that includes 4 through 12, or that their poor proficiency is preventing their progress in school, is entitled to receive targeted instruction from a professionally trained, that is an appropriately trained education professional. So I think you can point right back to the law that says that this is what a child would be entitled to, because that's really enshrined in the law. What happens in practice is more complex, but the law is on your side to provide that for children. And it is becoming more widely understood that we have a group of students who have not received the decoding, encoding, handwriting, and other kinds of instruction that are necessary to really map the English language to the brain and read effortlessly, and with joy, which is the goal that we want for every student. And schools recognize that this can interfere with their student learning in all subject areas. So I think that this is actually a better time than any I've seen in the last 25 plus years I've been in public schools for students to get what they need.
Okay, question, the tools on the list not to use are ones that we hear about in many schools. So what would you suggest, what should parents do if these are the tools that their schools are using?
I would recommend printing the 4 pillars of success from the National Council on Teaching Quality, because it's an excellent document, and to say these are the kinds of assessments that are shown to be valid and reliable, and these are specifically identified as those that we should not use. So why are we using them? And I need to see how my student is performing on each of the 5 components of reading. How is their fluency, comprehension, vocabulary, phonemic awareness, and phonics? And phonics refers to reading and spelling. So parents should be seeing how their student is performing in all 5 of those areas. And the screeners that are listed not to use can't provide that information.
Okay, this is a follow-up question about the older children, where the person is saying a district assessment such as the NWEA is used for older kids, and the dyslexia screener is only used for lower grades.
I think what they can do is they can request a comprehensive educational evaluation, which is everybody's right to do, and you can go through the Vermont Family Network to use the appropriate whatever language, so they can give you the exact language to use, because that is important. and the steps to follow to request that if you have information and evidence and you know that your student or child is struggling reading.
Yeah, okay. Are schools using the early bird screener in kindergarten?
I don't know. Doreen, do you know if the schools are using the early bird screener in kindergarten?
There isn't a mandated screener we don't
No.
have mandated screeners. So some schools may use it.
Okay. Are schools adopting SOR curriculum? What SOR trainings will principals and teachers have?
It's a great question. So SOR stands for the science of reading, which also stands for evidence-based instruction, what we're talking about, just so everyone knows that those connect. And so what are schools using now? It depends. Some schools may just be transferring over from F&P. They still may be continuing balanced literacy. But I think you know of some schools who are doing it well and right and using.
Well, I'm not going to
evidence-based.
start calling out schools.
Oh, that's fair. I didn't name schools,
but I would tell you that there are schools in Vermont and whole supervisory districts, supervisory unions that are adopting structured literacy curriculum. They're also, so structured literacy is also another way of putting evidence, of saying evidence-based literacy instruction or school or based on science of reading. There's a big emphasis in some districts on teacher knowledge so that they're not only following the curriculum, but really understanding the content so that they can provide students corrective feedback grounded in the reasons for the mistakes. So one thing that we do as reading teachers is error analysis. So when on a spelling test, we can tell whether a student is making a phonological error, like they don't understand the sound, or they're making an orthographic error, like they just don't know how to, I shouldn't say just, they don't know how to spell the word, but they have all the sounds represented, so it's phonetically written. And that takes training to reach that level of skills. So it's right now districts are in so many different places, and at the start of this presentation, I explained that the part of the reason for the law was because some schools are using evidence-based practices and some schools are not. So we have a need for Act 139.
So really this question relates to what you just said, but what is then the required training for principals and teachers?
What does that look like? That's what I was.
Oh, it's not, I mean, it says that they will receive training, K through 3, teachers and principals. That time frame is actually different. That training doesn't need to take place until fall 2025. So it gives school districts time to plan and allocate resources for appropriately funding the training that's needed.
I think it's difficult to answer the question because I don't think we answered the question. I think they might be looking for actual training. And I've asked this before at a conference with some very big experts who were there, and I still didn't get that answer. And the reason why, after all these years of studying, is that I didn't get the answer because it's so complex that it's not just one training that a teacher needs. They need training. Teachers need training in the 5 components of reading, and that's a lot. And
so it's a process.
It's a process.
Okay, we have a lot of thank yous. So I think we're at the end of the questions. If anyone is on and has a question that they would like to ask, you can go ahead. Okay, well, we are not too far after 4 o'clock, so thank you so much, Doreen and Brittany, for helping us to better understand the new literacy law. It looks like there's a lot to come on this as it is, unfolding right now. And as you mentioned, that is the council that will continue to be part of the process as it's rolled out in schools. So we have many more interesting workshops coming up for the folks who are on, and you can find details about all of that on our website. We also have a presence on social media, and for parents, we have 2 close Facebook pages, one for all families of children with disabilities and another one for families of adult children with disabilities. We also have a monthly e-newsletter, and our YouTube channel is where all of our trainings, including this one, will soon be put on it. So Vermont Family Network is here to help parents. When you have questions, contact us by phone or email. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.